And we are very excited to have his very last lecture for our 2019-2020 series. We are deeply indebted to the Cary sisters. The Cary sisters were Susanna and Eliza Cary, who in 1921 established a fund in the name of their father to permit his events and open lecture in Lexington. Personally, I think the Cary sisters will be delighted to know who today's speaker is and to know that their fund helps bringing together our town and our friends during these times which haven't really been very, very easy. If anything, I think the last couple of months have taught us that relationships are the most important thing in our life. We need relationship to function, and relationship with family, with friends, with neighbors, with co-workers, with the people we work for, the people we meet every day in the stores and on the street. But I also think that the last 2 months have taught us that relationships are really, really challenging. And I think there are very few avenues which describe the challenges of relationship as advice columns. And this is what we are having here tonight. Our speaker is Meredith Goldstein. Most of you know her because she has been in our homes for more than 10 years through her advice letters and column love letters through the Boston Globe. Many of you may also know Meredith because of her podcast, Love Letters. If you don't know it, I really advise you to start listening to it, especially if you're a parent with children or if you are somebody who is just wondering whether relationships have changed and dating has changed since the time when you were doing it. Now, Meredith is also the author of quite a few books. One is her memoir, Can't Help Myself, that she will discuss with us this evening. She also wrote a young adult novel, Chemistry Lessons, where a young woman uses sciences to manipulate her love life. And then we have one more novel, The Singles, about a group of dateless people at a wedding. Her next young adult book will be released next year. Meredith grew up in Maryland and now lives in Jamaica Plain. So Meredith will talk with us for 30 minutes, and then we will open the session, the lecture, to question and answer. What you are supposed to do is write your question using the question QA button at the bottom of your screen. If you don't see it, just move your cursor until the bottom appears, click on it, and you can type your question. Our moderator, Maggie Pax, will select the question and ask them to Meredith. The program will be officially over after an hour, but Meredith has kindly offered that she's willing to stay behind for a few additional minutes with whoever wants to stay behind if questions haven't been answered. I would like to say also that in a conversation I had with Meredith, she mentioned how often she says that she would like to have her readers sitting with her in her room to discuss the things she writes about in the column. I think it's quite extraordinary. This evening we are all sitting in our living rooms and she's sitting in her living room and we're talking together. So now, one more time, welcome to everybody. Be patient with us. If few things happen to be not perfect from a technical point of view, we're going to do our best. Also, please know that this event is recorded and will be available through YouTube and posted on our webpage and the LexMedia webpage. And now it's time for Meredith to just talk to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It is really surreal talking to people from my living room, and it feels completely perfect because this is where I do 90% of my work. Well, it's where I do 100% of my work now, but writing an advice column is a very private thing. People send me all of their personal problems and letters. So I always answer questions at home, and I'm delighted that you are here with me. Just to repeat, I'm going to talk about a lot of things about my job. If you have any questions, submit them throughout the talk. So you don't forget, the Q&A button is at the bottom. And also do not feel limited to ask questions about the advice column. I imagine that we have some longtime Globe subscribers who might have other questions about the paper, who might have questions about how we're working right now in the pandemic. And I'm happy to answer those as best as I can. So what I'm going to do is just tell you a little bit about the job. There might be people here who don't know what I do at all, and I'm going to explain it and talk about the history of advice columns. So I have been writing the advice column Love Letters for the Boston Globe now for more than 10 years. It started in 2009. How does one become an advice columnist, you might ask? The most common question I actually receive is, what qualifies you to be an advice columnist? And the amazing thing is that nothing really qualifies most advice columnists to be advice columnists. In fact, usually a mental health professional who is a licensed therapist or counselor would probably not decide to give you an answer to a question. You do this, don't do that, after reading 200 words, right, of a problem. Advice columnists are often longtime reporters like me. I studied journalism. I think there is a certain part of the nature of reporters, certain reporters, where we're very interested in the lives of other people. Combined with my sort of interest in just hearing people's stories, I was also raised in Maryland with a single mother who was the second person to get divorced in my neighborhood. And as a preteen, I was very interested in the perceptions of her divorce. You know, this was before the internet. I am turning 43 in June. And when I was that age, you couldn't just go online and date. So for a single parent who taught piano out of our house, where was my mother going to meet someone? Was it going to be a setup? If you can remember, back in the day, people did personal ads in magazines, right, where you could only write a certain number of letters. And I watched her enter the dating scene, ironically, right around the time that I did, and my older sister did. So we were three single women trying to figure out romance and dating in a world that was becoming slightly more modern by the day. So it was never strange to me to talk about personal life and questions. And I found that when I got to high school and college, some of the questions that people might have shied away from, I didn't even think of it as nosy. I just asked. I think also I was very good at keeping people's secrets. I was the person you could call in a crisis, and I never got sick of somebody talking about themselves. So in fact, it's a strange moment like this where I'm talking about me, but I love to hear relationship problems, and not because I take any joy in them. I just think it's really interesting to hear how people make decisions. I also think that it's a brave thing to be in a relationship. And I say that as someone who is quarantining by herself right now. You know, single people get a lot of credit for doing things on their own. But to me, the real bravery was people who coupled up with a partner, because it's just very vulnerable. So I've long been interested in this topic. I got to the Globe shortly after 2001. In fact, I started freelancing for the Globe right after they won the Pulitzer for the investigation into the Catholic Church. And the Globe was an incredible place to suddenly start a career at that point. And I wrote some news. I did my best to write some news, but it became very clear that I was meant to write features and stories about, at first, entertainment and the arts. But then I really wanted to write stories about people and the way they were living. And if you can remember back to that era, you know, sort of in the early 2000s, once I really got to the living arts department of the Globe, Facebook had just become public for non-college students. So one of the first stories I wrote about relationships was about how Facebook, in my opinion, had ruined high school reunions. Because when I was younger, I would hear older people talk about their high school reunions, and they were always surprises, right? Like, oh, this person, you know, turned into this incredibly beautiful person, or this person's divorced now, and now, because of Facebook, there are few surprises. We know what someone looks like when they've, you know, graduated 20 years earlier. To me, this idea of social media was taking away the surprise and shock of these types of, reunions. So after that, I would do stories about how text messages were evolving, that it used to be sort of rude to send a text to ask someone out on a date. And then that evolved into it being strange to call someone. Suddenly a phone call was invasive. So I was writing these stories, and right around 2008, I finally got up the courage to ask permission to write an advice column. And I am obviously not from here originally. I'm sure many of you are from here. For those of you who aren't born and raised in Boston or its surrounding areas, please know that this is a very, very unique geographic area. And I say that because growing up in Maryland, people were, at least in my area, less loyal to hometown. They were less concerned with the community around them. I mean, there's certainly community connections, but when I went to college at Syracuse, my Massachusetts friends very specifically always meant to return home. My Maryland friends were like, oh, I might go to New York, I might go elsewhere. Boston people were like, I am going home because there is no better place to live. In fact, I began to realize really quickly that Boston was much larger than I thought it was. When I was in college, I would say to somebody, what part of Boston are you from? And they would say, New Hampshire. So I realized that Boston was also this larger region, and it was this identity for a lot of people. And for that reason, I was really surprised that the Globe at that moment did not have an advice column that was in-house and local, especially as the internet was evolving. I just really felt like we had nationally syndicated advice columns. One was written by Margot Howard, who actually lived in Boston and still part-time does, and her mother was Ann Landers. But she was national. I mean, she was nationally syndicated and the letters came from everywhere. So, it's a complicated thing to ask a journalism organization to spend money and resources on an advice column. Putting me on the advice column meant that I would not be doing other things, right? So I had to go to some very scary people, at least for me at the Globe, who were thinking about spotlight investigations, who were thinking about much more serious news. In fact, if anybody saw the movie Spotlight, it's and I'm going to pull this up. This is a picture of the cast of Spotlight. The person on the right is Liev Schreiber, who plays Marty Barron, the editor of the paper. And imagine asking Marty Barron to put some of his resources into a love advice column. Marty was probably making that face when I asked him the question. Basically, it was very difficult to say, we're going to make this a priority. But one thing that really was effective to convince Marty was that I said that when people look back to newspapers to tell them how life was, they don't just look at news, they don't just look at sports coverage, they look at advice columns. Advice columns have a long history, and they are a time capsule of how people are truly living in a time. They're about marriages, they're about dating. And I didn't want the Globe to miss out on having that kind of time capsule put together. We're seeing this right now a lot, because when we look back at how we've all been affected by this pandemic, advice columns are going to tell us plenty. And I'm going to get to that soon. So, just how things are being affected now. So when I started writing the advice column, it was like, how do you come up with an answer? I realized that I had to set my own tone. There's some advice columnists out there who are very snarky. Maybe they write more for entertainment, that their answers are more shocking and funny. Also being in Boston, I realized that the people who were writing in, and by the way, they did write in quite quickly. The minute we advertised an advice column, even without listing my credentials, people began to write letters. I realized I wanted my tone to be the tone that I would use if I was hearing somebody's problem in my living room. So once again, it's good we're here. If I wasn't comfortable saying something out loud to someone in my living room, I shouldn't say it in writing, because that's just not fair, right? A lot of people who read the column say to me, how do you not tell all these people they're stupid? How could they not know the answer? I think when people feel that way, they're forgetting what it's like to be in love and to be insecure. But I also think they're forgetting that, these are real people. I'm not going to tell them they're doing it wrong. I'm going to try to help them figure it out. So my style to begin with was empathetic, and that should be obvious, but it's not. I also knew that Boston.com, was in its earlier stages back then, but it had a comment section. And I thought, the tough love is going to come from the anonymous commenters. It doesn't have to come from me. So when we started the column, the technology was so new that I approved every comment by hand. And I would get excited if there were 30 comments. I'd be like, oh my gosh, we got 30 comments today. And it was time consuming to read every comment and approve by hand. But what I also was being given the opportunity to do was to curate a really beautiful comment section. If somebody wrote something terrible, like we see every day on news stories and sometimes even on my own column now, I just didn't post it. Now, months later, we upgraded our technology and the comment goes up and we pull it down if it's a problem. But by having those first few months of manual commenting approval, I was able to curate this beautiful section. And I think still to this day, there are people who've been commenting on love letters for more than 10 years now. And some of them still understand the right tone based on those first days. For those of you who read the column in print, let me talk a little bit about how it works. Love Letters runs on Boston.com 5 days a week. Anywhere from 200 to 1,000 people might comment. 4 of those letters make their way into print a few days later. And then I pick the best 5 to 10 comments, whatever will fit in print, to give you a sense of what the conversation was about. So, if you read in print and you say, oh, who are these people who show up every week as like a Greek chorus? There are people who show up online every day on Boston.com. Some people ask, why do you often pick the same commenters? Well, they're really great commenters. I happen to be a fan of certain commenters. And luckily, I've met some of them in person. About a year into writing love letters, a lot of the commenters began to message me that they wanted to meet each other. They would say, oh, Red Sox Girl 50, I love her comments. I want to meet her. And I had never thought that a written advice column that was running online and in print would be a convener of people in real life. In fact, it scared me, right? Because we all hide behind these fake names. Well, except for me, I didn't know who these people were. What if they were weird and scary? But about a year into the column, I called a bar, it's a bar called Noir in the Charles Hotel. And I said, I kind of want to get my readers together. And they said, okay. And I liked the idea that the hotel had security. And I thought maybe no one's going to show up. I told everybody a time and place. And at first I was there by myself, very scared and feeling like I had been stood up for a date. But within, I would say about 15 minutes of the event starting, there were about 300 people and a line out the door. Noir has a capacity of 100. So it was kind of shocking. And that night I got to meet these people who at that point had been commenting daily for a year. It turned out I was wrong about a lot of them. You make these assumptions about what people look like, what their experience might be. I've learned never to assume that I know what a commenter is. In fact, one of our most boisterous commenters, I will not give them away, I found out a few years ago that she is a researcher at Yale. Not what I would have guessed. She likes to have a whole different persona online for her very tough love advice giving. Some people were exactly what I thought. This is a lesson that I would tell you to keep in mind when you also read letters in an advice column. I think we come into this with a little bit of bias. I've certainly learned my own, right? Where we read a letter and we picture a certain person who would be having this experience. I've learned that people make a lot of assumptions about gender, and that some people very toxically think about gender, right? If somebody writes in and says, I'm so sad my girlfriend broke up with me, I see in the comments section all of these comments like, man up, dude, this woman isn't the only person for you. It never occurs to them, or doesn't at least at first, that a woman might be writing the letter about a woman. And once the commenters realize that, they will say, oh, well, okay, I take back what I said. You're allowed to feel sad. This concept of man up, that men can't have feelings and that women are allowed to. From the beginning of this column, I wondered how my advice would change if I was writing to a man, to a woman. Would it matter? I've thought a lot about my own bias, but I've also learned plenty about how difficult it is for straight men to be allowed to have any feeling whatsoever. Any straight letter writer who is a man who expresses a lot of sadness, emotions, often gets beaten up in the comment section in ways that we're pulling down comments because people can be very uncomfortable with men showing emotion in that way. So that's something that I hoped would go away by 2020, and maybe it will. Maybe this time of reflection will help it go away, but that's something I'm working on. This assumption that women are always looking to get married doesn't turn out to be true, right? We're learning, I think, and I am learning also not to make any assumptions about who's reading, who's writing. So over time, I can make some generalizations, as much as I don't like to make generalizations about gender, and we don't want to assume these things. I have noticed some trends that I wanted to talk about, which is that at the start of the column especially, women, I found, would be very interested in their own privacy. They were concerned about it for obvious reasons, and they would create email addresses specifically for writing me a letter, like, letter to Meredith@yahoo.com. Whereas there were many men who wrote to me from their work accounts, like their Fidelity account. It was very strange. I still have theories about why that is, but it's one of the strange things about writing an advice column: who is willing to share their details, who should, who shouldn't, and who's very protective. When I started the column, there were some pretty standard questions. I mean, some are timeless. And I want to get into the history a little bit of advice columns. And, one of the first things I learned, and I'm going to share my screen with you for a second, is that one of the first live events I did, someone raised their hand in the audience and said, "Why are all advice columnists Jewish?" And I was baffled because I had not known that. I mean, it's not across the board true. There are many advice columnists who are not Jewish. Dan Savage is a great advice columnist, sex advice columnist who is not Jewish. But there is a history, Ann Landers, Margot Howard, I can name a bunch, Miss Manners. And there is something to it. I was not raised with much religion, and I was not bat mitzvahed, but I did grow up in a very culturally Jewish household where people were encouraged to ask questions. And I think that goes along through generations. And the reason I have this screen up is because the Bintel Brief was an advice column in the foreword in the Jewish Yiddish newspaper. This, Lena Fink happens to have written an incredible and drawn and illustrated an incredible graphic novel about it. But essentially, we're talking 100 years ago, people writing in to talk about their love problems. And what I love about this is that it winds up being that I'm part of this long legacy of Jewish advice columnists, but also a lot of the problems are kind of the same as they were back then. If you read this book in particular, you'll laugh. This concept of ghosting, that you date someone and they just disappear, it was a little bit easier to ghost back then, right? So that happens a lot. A lot of the problems are just timeless. Does this person want to marry me? Should I spend the rest of my life with this person? Is this person the right partner? Are we ready to have children? Why can't we talk about money? Some of these problems go on forever. Others are very specific to the time. So when I started the column in 2009, smartphones were on their way. I mean, we were getting smartphones. There were so many letters about snooping. It was so strange that people were just breaking into their partners' phones, email accounts, reading their private messages. I think this was a time where people were saying, oh, wait, Facebook has grown to the point where I now see that my husband has connected with his high school girlfriend. What are they saying to each other? Almost every day, I got a letter about snooping. And what is interesting is that over time, that has not been the case anymore. I am much more likely, at the time, it makes sense, the technology. I think once we, were trying to understand the technology, and in doing so, people were just breaking into each other's accounts. I realized more recently, like last year, I thought, I don't get nearly as many snooping letters as I used to. I think that's because we got smarter, like there are more passwords to protect our phones and our accounts. I also think it's because social media grew to the point where there aren't that many surprises in a relationship in general. For instance, you might know what your partner did for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You might know where they were because there's GPS on their phone. It's actually hard to surprise a partner throughout the day, because of social media the way it is and cell phones the way they are. I think everybody sort of unintentionally low-jacked their significant others, so the snooping becomes less important. In fact, you could probably just like trace the line of their day. So what is the most common question that I get now, you might ask? I'm going to answer this question as if I was answering it in January and tell you that the most common question I get now is about dating fatigue. Almost every day, I would get a letter about dating apps and the exhaustion that comes with it. If you are single right now, you can get on a dating app and you can swipe all night. And what is different about this? I mean, there's been online dating for a while. Before dating was brought to phones, maybe you'd open your laptop or your desktop computer and you would look at a few faces, send them messages, and then you would shut it down, close it, and go on with your day. Now, with an app on your phone, you can swipe all night. And in fact, right when my book came out, I had an event and a young woman came up to me and started crying. And I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "I am here because I love your column, but I feel like every moment I'm out and engaging with people, I'm missing the people I could be dating online." She said that the swiping had started to feel like a full-time job, and that if she wasn't actively engaging with it, she was missing out. There's that philosophy of say yes to everything, when you're single, and to her that meant always being on the apps. So if you are single, or if you have perhaps younger relatives, I have a lot of people who come up to me after book talks and they say, "Why is my granddaughter single?" or why is my son single? It's a difficult question to answer, but always be very empathetic about the fact that if they are on these dating apps, it can really feel like it's taking forever and that it takes a lot of work. So often my advice to these people is to really take a break. I think we're not supposed to be actively seeking a partner all day and all night. It's just a strange, on the one hand, what a great way that you can connect to so many people at once. On the other hand, it begins to feel much more catalog-like and much more tiring. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the book. I wrote a memoir. I will not say against my will. I'm delighted that I wrote it and grateful to those who allowed me to write it. It was not my idea. When Linda and John Henry bought the Globe in 2013, they are smart business people, and Linda had long been a reader of the column before the Henrys owned the paper. And she said to me, "Well, why don't we do Love Letters, the book? I've always liked this column." And I said, "Well, there really isn't a book. I don't think people need a compilation of letters." And she said, "Well, no, I mean a memoir about you. I want to know what you've been doing." And I said to her, "Well, I haven't really been doing anything interesting. I was not actively dating. What I told her was that I had had a horrible breakup right before Love Letters started. So if anything, I was against dating altogether for myself and just happier reading other people's problems." I also confessed to her that my mother had been diagnosed with cancer in, I guess, 2010. And she moved to Boston pretty quickly to get treated at MGH. And I spent most of those early years of the Love Letters column, like year 2 through 5, caring for her in Boston. My Globe friends were incredible. They were also caring for her. And she was getting chemotherapy. And, my mother was my best friend and she was around a lot. And actually the column pretty much gave us an escape, right? Every morning she would call me and say, "Did you post the letter yet? Is it online yet?" Because it gave her a distraction from what she was experiencing in life. And, she passed away in 2013, months before the Henrys bought the paper. And so I said to Linda, "Listen, I have not been doing a Sex and the City kind of life. I've been caretaking for a parent. It has greatly influenced the way I empathize with different readers. And it's made me think differently about relationships in the world. My mother was someone who, after her divorce, really just wanted a boyfriend again and wound up getting engaged twice. Both of those marriages did not happen. And when she was diagnosed with cancer, I said, "Do you want to call any of these exes? I won't judge you." And she said, "No, I don't know that they'd be good partners now." And it was another adult lesson in sickness and health, right? And what that really means and who's good at it and what it requires. So I'm telling Linda this and she was like, "Oh no, don't you see? This is the book. This is the book." So it was a delight to be able to write this memoir about how my own life, my breakup with a boyfriend, my mother's illness, my sister's dating life and eventual marriage influenced the advice I gave every single day. You know, having people in your life who are going through something very difficult, who are going through happiness, you know, it's just, it went both ways. Not only did my family's experiences, my own, influence my advice, my readers helped me with my family. I can't tell you how many times I would get a letter from a reader that was so lovely about, well, how will I date if I have a chronic illness? What is my value in the world of romance? And then hearing from people that they were incredibly valuable, that this was a shared experience, that many of us come to the table with, you know, different backgrounds, and that it doesn't make us ineligible for love. And that's one of the wonderful things about what my mother taught me. I think not just about what it was like to get divorced, you know, before it was okay. She taught me that even in the last year of her life, she was thinking about, like, well, what if I met somebody? I mean, she never, ever stopped thinking about love and the possibility of it all. And I will tell you this, I never told my readers that my mother was sick. I think they got a sense that she had moved here. Sometimes I would talk about myself. The day that she died, it was sort of unexpected. And I was in the hospital with her, and I didn't have a column ready, and I had never not posted unless it was a holiday. And I wrote a very impromptu letter to all of my readers, letting them know that my mom had just died. And if you want like a good cathartic cry, more than 1,000 people commented that day. I get choked up talking about it now. And they told me how the column had helped them. They told me about their own losses and grief. One of the questions I asked them for the first time, because suddenly I needed advice, was, what ex-boyfriend was I allowed to call? Who was supposed to comfort me? They also left me, because my mom had been a musician, they left me their own favorite pieces of music. And it was, you know, for every day that there are trolley comments and bad advice and, you know, where an online community can go wrong, it's amazing how they rally when they need to. And this was one of those days. So I'm incredibly grateful for the community that I have. And I have learned so much from them. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about, and we'll get to questions soon, but I want to talk a little bit about what life as an advice column is like now. The best way I can say it is that it is very weird. I actually worried that when the pandemic started, you know, I had bigger worries, obviously. I was worried about the world, the people in my life. I have a sister with chronic health issues. I have asthma. I just, you know, wanted to wrap myself in a blanket. I was worried about the globe. You know, it's like, this is a difficult time to be in journalism. It's an incredibly important time to be in journalism. But, you know, where are the advertisers who can support this industry? I didn't know about the letters, though. You know, what love problems would people be having if they're not dating? You know, which, by the way, only some of my letters are from single people. Many are from coupled people. There were so many letters related to COVID, pretty much all of them now, right? Because you can't see the world without that lens, that we started a special tag for them. You can see some of the headlines here. This has been so strange for people. Let's say you were dating for 3 weeks before this started. That's a huge commitment to decide to quarantine together. Let's say you are still swiping and meet someone online. You know, in the beginning of this, I heard cute stories about Zoom dates and, oh, well, he ordered dinner at the same time that I did. Well, that's losing its appeal, right? It's getting a little old. There are so many longtime married couples I know who are so sick of looking at each other. There are couples I know and who have written to me saying, we're so good at this. We're winning this. We are, and to be good at it is great, but if you're bad at it, that's okay. I started working on a story about couples that moved in together in January, because I thought, wow, if you made the choice to move in with someone in January, you didn't know this was coming. You must be in a really, you know, tough position. I've learned that those couples, you know, based on my reporting, are actually doing quite well because they had no basis of comparison. It's often the couples that have spent years developing a routine that are really going through it right now. So every day, I think right now, I wouldn't say I'm getting twice as many letters, but I am at least getting several more a day than I normally would. I think I'm getting a lot of regretful letters from single people who feel like they were not connecting enough beforehand. I am truly interested to know how this will look on the other side. You know, we've seen reports from China that divorce applications spiked. I don't think that's because this caused people to get a divorce. I think I've talked to researchers who say that this actually just speeds up decisions. If you were thinking about getting a divorce and you really wanted to and you were putting it off, maybe you decide to do that. I want to know about single people. I think people are going to be looking for partners. At first, they're going to be looking for multiple partners, and then they're going to be looking for companions, because I think, for people who are doing this alone, they're thinking that would this be better with the person next to me? I have to say, and I am incredibly optimistic about love, and I'm always open to it for myself. But as someone who is quarantining alone, I have a lot of friends checking in and saying, "Are you okay? We know you're all alone," and I keep worrying about them, because the idea of sharing space with just one person or a family also seems very challenging. So once again, my instinct is to say that the people who are really brave right now are surrounded by loved ones, because that's a very intimate experience to be having right now. So I know we have to get to questions soon. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the podcast. Once again, I have to give credit to Linda Henry for the podcast. I'm very afraid of technology sometimes, despite what is happening right now. And Linda also said, well, shouldn't it be a podcast? And podcast to me, it was still, a question. I wasn't someone who listened to Serial and all of the podcasts when they started becoming more popular. But then I thought about it. And one of the things that's missing with the Love Letters column is that you can't hear voices. You get one side of the story. It's basically a problem, my answer, and then it ends after the sort of audience engagement feature of it. I told her that if I did Love Letters as a podcast, I would not just want to talk about advice. Every episode of Love Letters, and there have now been 3 seasons, includes a person telling their story. The entire first season was about breakups, all different types, how do you get over this? And it was an incredibly hopeful season. People talking about the escalation of a relationship, how it failed, and what they learned from it, and how their lives became better because they went through that experience. Our second season, we called sort of the prequel, You Can't Get Dumped Until You Meet Someone. So how do you meet someone? And I found that season to be fascinating, because we talked to people, once again, of all ages, all different places in life. We explored topics like geography. Does it matter where you live? Are you living in the wrong place? We talked to people, is it okay to meet in the workplace? How do you make that happen, especially in this era? I recommend, of course, it's my own podcast, but I do recommend checking it out in this kind of environment when you might be looking for content. If I'm to make a recommendation, if you start with season 3, which is how do you know? That's the topic, which means how do you know when you want to marry someone or leave them or combine your finances? The first episode of season 3 starts in Scotland, in a town called Gretna Green, which is the marriage capital of Scotland. And it used to be late 1700s, early 1800s, where people could run over the border from England and get married at a younger age, or in a way that would have been illegal in England, maybe against their parents' will. If they were essentially eloping, they would run over the border to Scotland and get married. And I flew to Gretna Green to explore this history. And so that is episode 1 of season 3 is at least a piece of that. And I just think right now it's sort of, if you can't travel, you can at least be taken to other places. So I want to open it up to questions. And just, I'll say one more thing about the podcast. We are next week recording an interview with a couple that live in the wilderness, and they are socially isolated with each other 90% of the year. So we're going to get some tips from them about how to relate to a partner when you are truly alone with them. So I hope you have lots of questions. I know that was a lot of information about advice columns, and feel free to ask me anything. There's pretty much nothing I won't answer. So Maggie, if you want to pop in.
Yes. Meredith, what a great talk. So interesting to hear about the trends over the last decade and what you've seen, and hear your own personal story too. So yes, the questions are piling up, and I'm going to go right to the questions and just give you a couple of them. The first one that came in that I noticed was around the question of whether you feel like it's fair when you give advice having only heard one side of the love story. Maybe you've only heard from someone who's a biased reporter about their own love life. And how do you deal with that?
Well, my philosophy about this is like, you're right. I don't know. I will never go into it assuming that the letter writer is in the right? I mean, it's not a divorce court situation where I'm saying you get to do this, you get to do that, and you win. There's really no winning in this. So often I'm hearing from someone saying, I feel ... They're finishing the question. So I'm there for them. They've written me, right? Often I'm saying to them, well, often it is so often that I can take a highlighter to one sentence of their letter and say, well, it's clear you know what you want to do, right? So what might be holding you back, right? Very rarely do I get questions that say, am I right to think this? In the beginning, I did about cheating. I think that a lot of couples, especially newer couples, don't quite know how to define cheating. There was a letter that ran in like the first year where a woman said, my husband went naked hot tubbing with his college friends at a college reunion. Like nothing happened. It was just like what they used to do in college, and they did it again. And she said, am I allowed to be mad? She wanted my permission. And I was like, I don't know what the rules are, right? So I think that's where it gets a little dicey, where someone's asking me if they're right, but that's not what it usually is. It's sort of one person processing their problem. And that's what I'm helping with. So I try not to make any assumptions about the other side.
Okay, and whether they're telling you the whole story or just part of the story, right?
I assume they're not telling me the whole story, but that's interesting too, right? Because the process of self-editing is so revealing. If you tell me in 9 paragraphs that your partner is terrible, and then one line at the bottom is like, okay, they're okay sometimes. Well, you are making a case for yourself because you want to, right? So my assumption is that readers and writers are sharing with me the story they want to tell to help them get to the decision they want to make.
Right. So let's delve into culture today. Many TV shows are reality TV shows, and they're The Bachelor, The Bachelorette, or all these different shows that show, reality of dating. What do you think about these shows? Do they lead people to have a false sense of what dating is really all about?
Well, I'll tell you, dating is not like The Bachelor or The Bachelorette. I mean, at least from my experience, people always assume that I love The Bachelorette and The Bachelor shows. I happen to be a scripted show lover, so I love television that's about relationships, but I love it scripted. In fact, if I'm to make a Netflix recommendation right now for people, there's a British show called Lovesick that I find myself returning to. It's about 20-somethings in London dating, but I don't know if people watch The Bachelorette because they think it's real. I think they like it like sports. It's like a competition, So if I would just tell people that is not at all what it's like. And in fact, if you think about what it's really like, I think there's tedium in dating now that people should really be understanding of. If you're coupled and you don't know this, like ask someone who's single and younger or single and not younger, do you have an app on your phone? Let me see it. Let me see how it works. And I think you'll be able to empathize very quickly with what that experience is like. How much people reveal of themselves online, what the privacy issues are like. It's a really great way to figure out, well, what's really happening out there. And by the way, I think what is happening right now is going to absolutely change what had been happening. The way people were ignoring each other face to face before, I think we're going to welcome that kind of small talk because we are so desperate for it right now.
Well, then let's follow up on that. What do you think, if you look in the crystal ball of the future, what do you think that dating will look like post-corona? Someone on the Q&A asked just that question.
I'm an optimist, right? I mean, you'd think that writing a love advice column would make me a pessimist because all I hear, no one writes me a letter when they're happy. But it makes me always feel good about love because the people who write in, even when they're being the worst, they're still being thoughtful enough to write a letter. So I wind up being, I'm like, oh, good for them. They're really spending the time thinking about it. So I'm always the optimist with this. I'll tell you, I've heard from single friends, and maybe I feel this way myself. I haven't totally gotten there yet, that yes, they want to notice the people around them. I take walks in Jamaica Plain, and I'm so far away from people where I am, and I'll see someone far away, and for the first time, I'm noticing plants and animals that I have, we suddenly have time to slow down. And I remember texting a friend and saying, there was this guy walking far away from me. I really liked his eyebrows. I wouldn't have noticed that he was there before, right? Like from 25 feet away, I was like, good for you, sir, and your lovely eyebrows. I have a feeling that all these single people are going to feel bold. They're going to take risks. They're going to feel grateful for being able to be in a room with people. And I also think that if you're lonely right now, you're thinking, I want to meet somebody. Now, similarly, people who might be quarantining with somebody and saying, well, this isn't it. I think they're going to have to really analyze, well, what went wrong here? Was it really a problem with the relationship, or was it that the relationship was put through something that no one is designed for this, except maybe the couple I'm interviewing next week who, they do this 90% of the year by choice. But, again, I keep telling couples, if you're not good at this, it does not mean you're in a shaky, terrible relationship. Like, no one is good at this. They're not supposed to be.
Reality. It's not reality. Yeah. So kind of a personal question from one of the people who's attending. She said, I love your comment about feeling ineligible to date. I think I've psyched myself out of believing I'm dateable due to my age. How do I fix my thinking so I go into dating with the right attitude?
I think so many people think they're undateable. Like, I can give you a really significant list of the reasons I am undateable. Everybody's weird, right? I'm very lucky to have an older sister, and she lives in New York with her husband, and I write about her a lot in my book. I always joke that she is the more interesting Goldstein, but she's very extroverted. She's someone who has had a very aggressive Crohn's disease for a lot of her adult life, that sometimes results in her not being able to walk very well. She has long battled these things that I think certain people would have felt insecure about. And my sister lights up a room. My sister walks into a room and no one knows that anyone else is there. And I think from the time I was small, I would watch her in high school steal boyfriends, and she's a beautiful woman, but she, there were so many things, especially at that age, when you're a teenager, when you're in your 20s, these reasons that I might have been insecure, that she was just like, no, it's mine for the taking, right? And that was a great lesson, that so much of this is about attitude. And it's also about this weird assumption we make that we're the only ones, right? Everybody goes online and feels completely undateable. And then they find out they're wrong. And so I think just remembering that, there's some people who've told me I'm embarrassed because I'm in debt. I'm embarrassed because, I feel undateable because I have children and a custody, issue that makes it difficult to get out on certain days of the week. People call it baggage, and I just think of it as humanity. It's not, I don't know that I'd want to be around someone who didn't have a life. And I think, unless you are quite young, you're going to have interesting stories to tell. And I will also share that the man my sister married is 10 years younger than her. So, and I write about that in the book too, that it also taught me that, so often this question comes from women, right? Like, I very rarely do I hear from straight men, well, have I aged out of this, right?
True.
If only, right? But I am noticing a lot more women dating younger men, and this starting to even out, and then people dating their peers, God forbid. So I would just say that, like, I like to walk into a room and pretend I'm my sister, and I give you permission to do that too.
Wrap yourself in a little of your sister's glory. That's perfect.
Yep.
Whatever works. Great. So back to coronavirus, because we can't get away from that for very long. One of the questions that came in is, I read an article, this person says, about that you should avoid exes who get in touch during this pandemic. Do you agree?
Well, you can go to my Instagram. If you go to, I think it's probably just Instagram.com/Meredith Goldstein. I actually made a flow chart in like the second week of this with the headline, should I call my ex? Should I text my ex? Because some of it's like a good natured thing, right? Like, I want the people who I love or have loved to be okay. But some of it's not about that. Some of it is about boredom. Some of it is about stirring the pot. I would really ask yourself why you're doing it. And in return, why you're picking up the phone, why you're answering. There's so many ways to just say, nice to hear from you, hope you're well too. We do a lot of romanticizing and fantasizing, which is fine, but acting on it because it's a pandemic, I don't know that it's so necessary. I think that there is so much good TV. If you watch some good TV and you still want to do it, I mean, you have to really play out, well, what is the reason? Am I really concerned about them? Is there someone else I can call to check in about them? Like, I can't make a good case for it. So go to the flow chart, because I feel like it will, all signs point to just go back and watch more TV. But it is happening, and it's happening by the week. You know, I think for most people, the X calls started coming in week 4 and 5. I will also tell you that if you remember when I said that snooping was a letter that I got in 2009 that sort of went away, it's back. So right now I'm not getting the dating fatigue letters because it's the opposite, right? Everybody wishes they could be dating to some extent if you're single. Now I'm getting letters from people in couples that they're snooping. And I think some of that is boredom. Some of it is seeing what a partner is like during the day. I've had letters saying, oh, I didn't realize my partner was really patronizing to people at work, right? Because you're seeing that, right? You're seeing how much your partner might be on technology. You are on technology yourself that much more. I also think there's a psychology to control right now. We have no control over anything. I can't tell you when we'll be able to move socially and freely about the world again. Like, every press conference brings up more questions. So what if the one thing you can control is what's in your partner's phone? I think that's why I'm seeing it again. So I'm going to discourage you from calling an ex, and I'm also going to discourage you from snooping, because privacy violations are not good and they will not make you feel better.
So you really have like a sociological time capsule, right? You're seeing what's happening in real time throughout this period, the last 10 years, but also this period, and seeing what's really popping up for people. And that's kind of
yeah. I mean, between the letters, which so many of them are similar, a lot of the letters I get are from one spouse who is completely irritated that their spouse does not have the same rules for safety. You know, someone wrote into me, hopefully not on this, in this room, you know, why does, you know, a woman saying that her husband kept finding reasons to leave the house that she felt were unsafe, right? Like that it just upped the risk factor. She was like, now he's driving off to get a used kayak. Why do we need to use kayak? It was just like, you know, or this person won't wear a mask. You know, negotiating the rules of safety in a house, it can be really complicated. So I'm seeing that too.
So tell us a little bit about, somebody asked the question about touching. And there's been a very big trend over the last couple of years about consent and about really respecting people's boundaries. Has that kind of faded away now because nobody's seeing anybody in real life? Or is it, you know, just a thing of, that was kind of a flash and then it went away, or did it persist? And
that's an interesting conversation. My friends are all making fun of me right now because I'm a terrible hugger. You know, for someone who writes so much about lovey stuff, like I'm an awkward hugger. I've always been that way. And I'm much more of a, hey, you know, waving hello person. And they said, oh, you must love this. Hugging is going to go away. And I don't think hugging is going to go away. I think when things are safe again, that will happen. But I think that, yeah, I think consent will be a big conversation, not only for the reasons it had developed as a conversation, but now we just want to be careful about how someone sees their own safety, right? You know, if someone has a chronic illness and is worried about their own health, like, you know, we're so much more conscious of what we do, you know, the things that we do might affect somebody else. So I don't think, you know, physical touch and will go away, but I do think hopefully people will be very conscientious about it in new ways. I mean, listen, we're all learning things. I don't think anybody's going to wash their hands in the old way. Like now, I like the fact that I used to just do 5 seconds. Like who was I to think anything could happen in 5 seconds? You know, we're all going to be these 20-second people, I think, for the rest of our lives. So, but I don't think that's a bad thing that we'll think to have conversations about consent in that way.
Yeah. So then another question came in around kind of the future of dating. So assuming that dating apps continue, which I don't know if you think they will, or people will just be so excited to see each other in real life, maybe we'll no longer do that. But if they do continue and you could design your own perfect dating app, what would it be like? Would it have questions? Would it have photos? Would it have, what kind of information would be on the profiles and what would be left off?
What a great question. I do think we will continue to use apps. I think that in a world where, especially more people are going to be working remotely when this is over, I think there's going to be a new understanding that that in-person need is there, but not all the time. And there are people who are just working remotely anyway, right? Or who are isolated, and online dating and app dating is an incredible way to connect people you would never meet otherwise. Right before this started, I wrote about an app called S'more, like S''MORE, that rewards you for communicating with someone. So you have to, the face is blurry, and the more you communicate with them and like them, then the face is revealed. Now, of course, at that point, you might look at the face and say, I don't want to make out with that. And then now you've spent some time, but it's this slow cooking idea of, instead of just scroll, that you would really engage. I can't say that would be my preference, but I have always had this theory that there's a certain kind of person, and I might be one of those people who's like, oh, I'm not a good online dater. I'm not a good app dater. I wouldn't be good at that. I would love to make an app called I Wouldn't Be Good at That, and put all those people together. The people who think their personalities are not designed for that. I find that it might draw the same kind of personalities, like I think I'd rather just meet somebody in person. Like, what if they were all on one app? I think that would be a lot of fun.
That's an interesting question. I was going to ask you about my own son, who's 24, lives in California, and he's like, I'm not good at this. I hate texting. I'm not witty. I can't keep up a conversation on texting. This was before coronavirus, but what would you say to someone like that? He's like, it's just too much to keep trying to text with these people. And
it is hard. And I think about my late grandparents a lot because they had a wonderful, beautiful marriage. But my grandfather was like not a good writer. He sort of wrote like he talked, and I kept thinking, oh, he would fail at this now, right? Because people would see his terrible grammar and the fact that he's just sort of like, and she was such a reader. She would have never swiped right on him. So, what I would say is if you hate doing it, you probably shouldn't be doing it, or at least not only that, right? And there are some people who do connect better in person. And when it is safe, activities and being out there, dating events that are in person are worth doing. Setups, if I have one wish in life, it's that everybody got nosier and more like a busybody, because, there's one podcast episode I have in season 2 about why people don't like setting up friends, right? If it doesn't work, they'll be angry with me. I don't know what they like. What if they get offended? Meanwhile, the single people are like, hey, couples, you're my only key to different communities. And I've been set up a lot of times. I've never been angry with the person who set me up, and I'm clearly still single. So, I think that none of them worked that well, but I so appreciated someone invading my privacy and saying, no, I really want you to meet this person. Like, not everybody wants it, but to ask and to really think about, I've set up a bunch of people in my life. And I love, it's like, what a fun thing, right? So to really say, I would wonder if your son has said to people, have you ever thought about setting me up?
So what's your success rate as a yenta? Are you good?
I'm fairly good. I count anything more than like 3 or 4 dates. To me, that's success. Like, it doesn't have to be a marriage, but there is a former Globe employee who's now at the Washington Post, and I set her up when they were 23 and 25, a friend from college, a very close friend from college with her. And now they're like, 41 and 43 and still together, and just moved down to DC for her to work there. And so they're my great success story. I will say that when I set them up, I really thought they would date for like 2 weeks. I can't take credit for like the length of this relationship, but I've had a few couples who've gone on a bunch of dates, and it's one of the reasons I like meeting new people. Is my first thought sometimes is, who do I know? If they're single. So I hate to be the stereotype, but I like it. And I think it's okay to say, if somebody says, don't do that, I don't want that. Obviously consent is a big piece of this, but I think people don't do it enough.
Wow, that's sweet. So listen, I know we're getting close to time, but there are a couple more questions I'd like to squeeze in, if that's okay.
That's fine.
One of them is super specific. It says, I'm a longtime reader and listener of your podcasts. And by the way, there's a lot of fan mail on this Q&A. So this person says, I'm conflicted about the stories you share in season 3. what is your view of commitment in marriage and the sanctity of marriage vows? This is a serious question.
This is a great question because season 3, so with the podcast, you're sort of always balancing unique stories with, like none of the models of relationships in any episode, you know, in any season are like endorsed models, right? Like that'll work for everybody. There were a few episodes in season 3, the How Do You Know, that dealt with open relationships, just, you know, sort of a new way to define commitment. I wanted to explore them because increasingly over time, I get more questions about polyamory. I get more letters about, interestingly, people marrying younger and then having a more liberal view of commitment. I mean, I think this is something that, this is often the trajectory of things, right? Where like, sometimes the gay community will establish different kinds of relationships and then the straight community is like, oh, that looks, what if that worked for us? I mean, it's like, you know, this sort of interesting, you know, Dan Savage, again, that sex columnist, talks about, he's been married to his husband for like forever. And he talks about so many people who criticize his marriage because it has been monogamish, he says, they're still together, but the people who criticize him have been divorced like 16 times or something, you know what I mean? So it's not so much that I endorse some of these more unique ways of being committed to someone, but I want to explore them as possibilities. And I never like thinking of failure when it comes to divorce or cheating or relationships ending and beginning again, only that they're experiences. And I think sometimes having those experiences can fine tune a relationship to be better. There's one episode about a couple that gets divorced 3 years from the day they're married. And they, to sort of commemorate their divorce, they get together and sign the papers and jump into a pool at the same time. It's but very, very bizarre to me. But throughout the course of their 3-year marriage, they also open up the marriage. I mean, to me, it is clear that it is a gateway to leaving the marriage, and they were not quite, you know, in that marriage for the long run. But I learned a lot. You know, what works for some people doesn't work for others. And, you know, for our next season, I want to get into lessons learned at different ages. And I imagine we'll have a variety of people as well. But, you know, I think I have to be very open-minded about there's no right way to do it. You know, just like cheating is going to be different for one couple, you know, as we know, we have certain political leaders who believe that having lunch with someone who's not your spouse is not okay, right? And I clearly don't agree with that. So I think that it's just sort of figuring out where you fit in the middle of it all.
Sounds like you meet people where they are, right?
Yeah, I think I have to. Otherwise, it's a, you know, it's,
yeah.
I want to at least.
Yeah, definitely. So just for the last question. So here's somebody who's a fan who says, hi, Meredith, you are super amazing with how you connect our community regarding such an important topic, if not the most important topic in life. And this question came from actually a number of people who wrote in, said, what is the criteria for picking a love letter to be featured? What are the important factors that determine the importance of addressing that relationship issue? Because you must see all kinds of things come in. How do you choose?
I do. I get that question a lot, and I have to admit that it's not like this incredibly thoughtful process. And I say that because I'm running what's coming in. So what's really interesting to me, and this year is a total outlier, but there are different parts of the year where I tend to get certain types of questions. So, you know, about 6 years in, I realized that in January, people are really mad. Partly because it's winter. I mean, we do get national and international letters, but I would say the majority still come from New England, at least East Coast. We have a lot of New York readers. A lot of people who went to college in Boston and now live at different parts of the East Coast. So they're mad it's cold out. They're mad because they thought they were going to get something during the holidays that they didn't get. And I'm not just talking about gifts. I'm talking about maybe it's a proposal. Maybe it is an experience with in-laws. Maybe it's a memory. So they're saying, well, that didn't work out the way I thought in December, so I am upset. So there's a spike in letters in January. There is a spike in letters right around now because the minute it gets nice, people are like, well, maybe I should be single.
Oh.
maybe I need, I mean, there is this cyclical, strangely weird, animalistic, like, I just noticed everybody and they're all wearing shorts. It's like a very, like, when it's like, as in a New England winter, you've also been locked in your house, like maybe through March snow with someone. So I always say to people, like, okay, yeah, it's March, or I mean, it's May, like, give it a few weeks. It's going to be winter again. You might not, when choosing the letter, I go for variety, but I also go for what's in front of me. So I try not to, there's also the problem of someone will write a letter and they will see themselves in that, the reader will see themselves in the letter, and then they'll write a similar letter, right? So it's also breaking up those similar letters. And right now it's making sure that with the virus letters, like, so many are similar, right? So it's like, what are, telling people different stories. But there isn't a whole process where I'm saying this is sociologically important right this second.
No, but it's interesting to see how you see the cycle of the decades, but also the cycle of the year and how it really changes throughout the year. And now the cycle of a pandemic that nobody could have appreciated was coming. So.
Yeah. If I can tell you something that's a little bit gross, and I'm sorry I looked distracted. I think it might have just started raining against my window, but it's like, what's happening? I once had dinner with a man who used to run the National Zoo in DC. And when I told him what I did, we were talking about these trends, and he said, what's really weird? He said, when I ran the zoo, one day it would be really ice cold, and the next day I would go inside and all the animals would be like intimate with each other. And the day after that, it was warm out. It's like the animals knew. And I was like, that's so weird. It happens like that with my letter writers.
We're all animals at heart.
Maybe it's kind of a horrible thought, but I was like, but this spring is obviously incredibly different because people can't have those thoughts, or at least they can't act on them.
Right. We're so delighted to have you. And it's really great to have you at this point in time when we're all feeling socially isolated, to have someone talk about, intimate relationships and love, and also to have you as our test case for our first online Cary Lecture, which has been amazing. We've had over 200 people join.
It's a delight to be here. And I just, if I'm to leave with any messages, I just want people and couples to know, like, the single people out there give you a ton of credit, especially parents. What I'm watching my friends do and the people in my life do with children, and people say, oh, well, people with kids, they signed up for this. No one signed up for this. So I am in awe of your ability to get through every day with, like, love and gratitude and any sort of patience, because all I have to do is entertain myself, and that's hard enough. So bravo to you for those of you who are really making this work.
And vice versa to all the young people or single people who have a little bit of a pause, but
yeah.
Life will be.
I promise you the pause will be lifted and the world will come back to you, and we'll be waiting for you.
Absolutely. So Meredith, why don't you pop up, because some people coming tonight haven't been following your blog and haven't been reading your materials. So could you just pop up your contact info, and who knows, maybe you'll get a flood of email from people who've been on tonight who didn't ask a question tonight but might want to do.
Yeah, so right here is my email. I'm clearly home checking my email. It's where you can find the Love Letters column as it runs on boston.com. For those of you in print, if you want to get a taste of that, you might not. It's a different world out there. You can email an anonymous letter to lovelettersatglobe.com. If you go to loveletters.show, that's where the podcast is. And also, if you have Apple Podcasts or Spotify, just type in Love Letters and it'll come right up.
Great. There were some other people who had questions. I know we just ran out of time for them, but I'm hoping that they will follow up with you at your email address. So once again, thank you on behalf of the Cary Lecture Series. We're delighted that you could join us tonight.
No, thank you for coming. We'll call it date night. Thank you for coming.
Great. Thanks so much. Yeah. Thanks.